Hello there and welcome to Progress Report. I am your host, Lennox Gasper, and we are here with Minister Pauline Sukhai, who we caught up with at the 48th sitting of the National Assembly. Minister Sukhai, thank you very much for taking the time out to be here on this interview with us. Minister, let's begin our discussion with you describing the level of development the government would have brought to the indigenous people of Guyana over the past 2 years.
Thank you for asking. It is indeed my pleasure to be able to pronounce on some of the development which the PPP civic government has embarked on across Guyana, and also more specifically to the indigenous villages and communities scattered across all 10 administrative regions. Let me start first with aspects of the ministry's work. When we entered back into office in August 2020, we had to start working to reverse some of the eminent neglect which were taking place in the hinterland, more specifically too. And giving you one example which I am very passionate about is about providing movements, transport to indigenous communities that are very remote, and that their not only their living conditions but also their communication and movement depends on a road link. Region 8, for example, their roads were highly neglected, extremely neglected. And when we got back into office, we reintroduced what is called the community participation related to maintenance of roadways. That project or that support came from the Ministry of Public Works. However, the impact it has is that it provides a better trail network, upgrading of the trails to ensure that villages can move from one village to the next. And because Region 8 is connected to Region 9 by that road or that trail, it was almost impossible. In fact, there is one businessman who lives in Monkey Mountain, and he continued to lament when we came into office of how it took him more than 12 hours from Monkey Mountain to Karasabai. And I can tell you that that now is still difficult, but it doesn't take that enormous amount of time. Stretching from Monkey Mountain to Tusining, there's that road going up and down the mountains, which they've had to find alternative diversion because the road was so neglected that not even the Altarian vehicles were happy to go through that road. And I've had cause to travel those roads during the very, very bad period, and now during our period, and it has become much more safer, much more easier. And in 2021, our government provided 100 million to begin the process of rehabilitation and upgrading those roadways so that our Amerindian brothers and sisters in that region can, move more safely and freely. This year, $290 million were provided to the village councils to upgrade all the road network, stretching from Kaibarupai right on to Monkey Mountain and the communities in between, all the communities that are there. For example, Kaibarupai links into Sand Hills, links into Waipa, then into Kamana, through Kurkabaru, Arasawa, into Keto, then into Bamboo Creek, stretching onto Monkey Mountain. So it's one huge network of interconnected roads and trails that were totally neglected. Today you can travel And I'm pleased that my government allocated funds to provide all-terrain vehicles that can traverse those roads, tractors that can utilize also those roads, providing easier access to transporting goods into those areas. And even lorries were provided over this last 2 weeks, 2 years. And so that is just one example of what we inherited, where the investments we've provided, and where we are today. It's much easier. The challenge of the regions, the hinterland regions, exist, but it is the addressing that challenge and improving and minimizing the challenges that counts for the people. So that I'll use that example to show how our government in less than 2 years was able to upgrade roads, hinterland roads, made investment through the budget, and allow the people to combined maintain their roads. And they do it in a very with lots of effort putting into it, because the impact is greatest. They also provide value for money, and it provides an income to the people, which allows them to have purchasing power, and their cash economy revitalized. So that alone in its sense is not only about road maintenance, but it's about livelihood and revitalizing the cash economy, and the villagers being part and parcel of their development.
Thank you, Minister. What you share there, actually, that's evident of this government's active role of bringing development to the people that are within the hinterland communities. What about the 93 million that were earmarked for the students about 805 students who were supposed to benefit from scholarship? Can you give us an update on that program?
Annually, yes, we were able to provide support to students. You would recall that when we arrived into office, that we were met with COVID-19 pandemic, and then the floods, and school was suspended or closed almost indefinitely over a year or more. And our support to the students continued. Even though they were out of school, they were connected to the internet in some cases where internet was available, and for data plans and so on. In the more coastal area where internet was available, we supported them. But most recently, we have back in our dorms the students, and we are able to provide them with full support, scholarship support again. And scholarship support takes care of their stay in the dormitory, which is accommodating them, providing a dorm allowance, a uniform allowance, free meals. Of course, they are allowed to use all the utilities of the dorms, including electricity and water, free of charge. Just to add also that we have a tertiary dormitory where we are supporting the tertiary level students who firstly had to find a place to stay in the city or on the East Coast corridor if they were going to the university or to technical institute, and they had to pay for light bill and water bill and transport, etc. What we have done is we have taken off the bulk of that expenditure by providing accommodation for university and technical students. We provide them again with free lights and water. They have a data plan available free, internet free in fact. What we don't do for the tertiary level student is that we do not provide a dietary, but we provided full kitchen, equipped kitchen for them to, provide for themselves as it relates to meals. So we've taken off the bulk of their expenditure. Even when teachers would complain who were not in the sort of part of college, they had to rent a place And when you rent, you have to pay light bill, water bill, then you have to pay internet bill too. For our tertiary level students, all of that is free.
Minister, recently we had seen the National Two-Shows Council's conference being pulled off. Could you give us an insight into what were some of the major issues raised and how does the government plan to address those issues?
Yes, fortunately for us, Guyana worked very hard, putting a lot of interest and effort into minimizing the risk of COVID, and that was one of the main reasons why we could not congregate or gather the two shows at one location to have that conference. So for 2 years, well, I would say not for 2 years, well, at least for 2020, because we came in August. In 2020, we missed that event. And as soon as our country rolled back the curfew and reopened our country, we began to prepare for the National Two Shows Conference, which is very important and significant for Amerindian leaders, elected Amerindian leaders who, in fact, are the true legitimate representatives of the people, the Amerindian people. And we prepared, of course. Took a lot of effort on our staff. Our staff is not a very huge staff, but I want to say here that they put their best foot forward, and they were able to deal with the logistics. They were able to deal with all the planning and the details, and we did indeed convene that conference in collaboration with the NTC Secretariat. The government traditionally funded the event, and we always co-host with the NTC. In this scenario, what has happened is that the NTC was not in existence in terms of the executive, because when you're no longer Tushao, then you're no longer a member of the NTC. But the secretariat worked through the period, because there is a secretariat to hold the fort. And I want to draw the attention here, seeing I'm getting an opportunity to talk about it too, is that we were accused, or it was alleged that the ministry attempted to hijack the NTC. That was not so. The NTC by law had to be, notice had to be published a month. We took the opportunity to inform the NTC Secretariat that our intention to host, co-host, and to fund this conference was known. They had initial meeting with both the Secretariat staff and the outgoing chairman of the NTC. The outgoing chairman of the NTC agreed to attend and to present the report. The NTC Secretariat prepared that report, on which they provided to us to circulate at this NTC for the incoming chairman to circulate. Draft agenda was discussed. It was put together on paper and resent to the Secretariat. We did not have any responses, and no contribution of changes were offered. So we proceeded that agenda was desirable and acceptable. And throughout the Secretariat was working on various aspects of the event. The chairman, in fact, the outgoing chairman, was informed about his flight arrangements 2 days before. They contacted him, and he gave assurances that he will be joining the flight out as scheduled. And when the day came, that's a day after contacting him and him giving us the assurance that he is aware of his flight schedule and he will be on the flight, he was a no-show. And so I just want to clear the air that he was also on the program. Yes, we had a successful conference, the high points and the main issues.
Yes.
Of course, there's a lot of need still in the Amerindian communities, need for investment funds, need for capital items, mainly equipment and and machinery. There was need for youth and sports development. There wasn't many complain about health and educational issues, because over the last couple of months, the sectors have really driven their agenda to support the rehabilitation, upgrading of those facilities, and it's continuing. And so we broke out into a working session with various ministers attending all the sessions. There were sessions for Region 1, which is a large, comprised of a large number of villages. There was the coastal area, which included 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10 Tushals. We had 7 Tushals, Region 7 and Region 8 separately, and Region 9 separately. Coming out of those, we've had focus on agriculture, focus on ecotourism, focus on upgrading and constructing new infrastructure. We've had sports ground and sporting facilities also featuring, and of course investment, jobs, and so on. So how do we intend to deal with that? His Excellency made some very significant pronouncement on the closing day,
Yes.
having compiled and presented the work of the results of the working sessions. Ministers worked throughout the night with the technical people, and by 8 o'clock the next day, His Excellency was presented with
The report?
and a costed report. And of course, the need is great, and our intention to bridge the gap between the coastal and the hinterland, and to propel and fast track development for the most vulnerable communities and so on. It found favor with His Excellency, and he made a pronouncement that he will be investing, or our government will be investing, in excess of 3 billion Guyana dollars to address the significant areas and sectors that were detailed in that working session report. I think that the Amerindians were very elated that for the first time after 2014 that they were able to sit, have a conversation with His Excellency, engaging with the ministers, and the result of their 4 days here, because the first day was the opening session with land tenure matters and the low carbon development and elections, but the working days that they came away with significant investments for their villages. And that will, of course, propel greater advancement of the conditions in the villages across the locations where Amerindian villages communities are found. And I want to also say that it's not only for the Amerindians, but there are many settlements and community which our ministry work with that are managed by community development councils in the hinterland. And so those community development councils chairpersons were also part and parcel of this huge injection of state funds that will see further development being propelled in their communities. Another announcement the President made was the increase in the Tushao stipends, the senior councillor stipends, and the chairman of CDCs, for those that we work with, that are located in the hinterland and remote areas, riverine and remote areas. They too will receive a stipend equivalent to the senior councillors, because they too also administer the affairs of those far-flung communities. So for us, we believe in terms of the planning, the logistics, and the successful convening, it's a plus. We got good feedback. But more importantly, it was the investment that our government was prepared and is always willing and has the political will to support and to do so diligently is what is the high point for stimulating development in Amerindian communities that will provide a much more definite livelihood options and of course food security.
Beautiful, and I am happy that you took the opportunity to clear up the misinformation as it relates to the hijacking of the Tushaus conference. Can you tell us about the election? Those persons who were elected, the Tushaus that were elected to be a part of the National Tushaus Council, and what are their statutory roles and responsibilities as elected office holders?
Well, the National Tushao Councils comprises of all elected, democratically elected Tushaus. So the CDC, let's start from this point. The CDC chairs are not part of the NTC body, neither are senior councillors. The NTC comprises of elected Tushaus. So those that are elected, the chiefs, are members of the NTC. The elections in 2021, because we did not have any NTC in a general convening a general meeting, we planned to hold a regional Tushaus meeting so as to provide an alternative to ensuring that they were able to work and have an engagement as a group or as clusters with the government. Region 9 meeting was successful. The others were postponed indefinitely because of the COVID pandemic. Many leaders were tested positive and we could not put at risk every leader. And so we had postponed it indefinitely. So the election that took place now took into consideration the elections that took place in Region 9 for the 3 candidates. So the question was put whether they will go ahead with those 3 candidates, and it found favor. Everyone endorsed it. And so the election is usually done by clusters. So the clusters for the coast are generally single, excepting for Region 2 and Region 10. In Region 10, the cluster is the Demerara River and the Berbice River. Oh. So they produces 2 executive members. And for Region 2, again, it's the land villages and the river villages. Oh. So like the Tri-Lake, which is on land, they will produce 1, and the Pomeroon River and the river will produce another. So that's how they are clustered, and they will go in their cluster and they will elect among themselves a representative to sit on the executive. The other areas like Region 9, they have 3, Region 1, 3, Region 7, 3, and Region 8, 3. And so they all go into their cluster and they select. And that's how the election is done. If there are more than one contesting or nominated candidates, then it goes to a vote. No. And you could either do the vote by show of hands or you could do a secret ballot. So that went well. There was no objections. There was no concerns raised. There was no contradiction or conflicting issue over the election. It went smoothly. It was announced, and then the announced Tushaus, who formed part of the executive, took the break to go and elect their executive office bearers, where they would elect the chair, they would elect a secretary and a treasurer, and may elect any other executive member as is necessary. So they went into their meeting. Of course, I sat in because I'm an ex officio member to that committee, to that executive, and they conducted their elections. And the elected Derek John as the NTC chair. He was elected. There was an election, but he won. He won the election, you know, fairly and with a majority of the votes. The treasurer and the secretary were also elected, and the vice chair. In fact, the vice chair, they did say they wanted to do a vice chair, which is like they may elect another person, and there was a tie. There was a tie by show of hands, and there was a tie by secret ballot. So that was left to rest until they could decide, and they did. However, I would say for the elections, I believe that there was no major concern. In fact, there was no concerns raised. And the entire membership of the Tushao, who are part and parcel of the NTC, found favor and approved of those who will sit as the executive to address matters of concern to them. The roles of the NTC executive is to provide leadership in the organization. They are to strategize on behalf of the development for Amerindians. They also have to provide empowerment and training and advocacy. And so it's more like a representative body that drives the issues on behalf of the village through their leaders, which is also a very good thing because they can learn from each other. They can deal in a team-like manner with matters that might seem difficult to address. And they can also hold collective positions on matters of national interest or matters that are related to Amerindian development. And we have seen in the conference also how they held a collective decision to support the low carbon development strategy. That was a proposal which the executive believed was important enough to table at the NTC, and they did table it. It was unanimously approved and supported, and so they believe as a collective that the LCDS has prospect of bringing greater investment into their communities, and that some communities are not forested and some are forested, but the LCDS proposes that all communities will benefit, whether you have forests or not. And so I believe that that too is important for them, so that not one set of communities will benefit. In addition to that, Amerindians are very particular about the forest. They have been preserving it in their own traditional way, and I believe the LCDS is aligned to that position, whereby we are to sustainably use our forests to the benefit of our nation, because the forest, of course, as everyone knows, has a very important function of storing carbon. And therefore, with that service, which we can now offer for sale, and the storage capacity it has, will bring us, some more financial fortunes. And the Amerindian leaders are aware of that. They've also taken part and been involved in the consultation for the LCDS.
And at the conference, we noticed that the government took the opportunity to hand over a few of the titles to some Tushos. And I know this has been a great passion of yours. What does the land titling, maybe you can tell us about the land titling process, and what does it mean for our indigenous people?
Well, if I do have the time, I can start from where our government got significantly involved in bringing or making the reality the commitments we've always had as a party. The People's Progressive Party, Civic, truly believe that the independence condition that will see Amerindian not being landless after independence. We took that very important. And even though we may not have been in office over the period, when we got into office in 1992, we immediately took state funds to begin titling and demarcating lands. It was slow. Every year we did maybe a maximum of 2 to 5, the most. And in 2013, when we signed the agreement with Norway, the LCDS agreement, and we receive payments for our standing forest, we set aside monies that will drastically improve the rate at which our government was addressing land titling. What does it entail? It entails that villages that were not titled could apply to the government to be titled. And villages that were not surveyed, that the law distinctly states that the government will be responsible or will fund that exercise. And so the demarcation merely means that if you have a grant of land in your village name and it's not surveyed cadastrally, the government has to survey it for you and pay for that exercise. Titling means that a village who may not be titled don't own formally the land, that they can apply for land and the government will grant them what they've applied for after a fully investigative report has been conducted. And there's a step-by-step process outlined in the law how it should proceed or how the process should be managed. And so having done that investigation and finding that there is need for land to be allocated to the community that has applied, the government will then grant land to those who have applied for it. So it is that simple. It is not a huge issue, as some advocates make it out to be, that there's a big disparity or there's a big conflict between government and Amerindian for land. It is a political decision. It's a government-supported decision that we will grant land to the indigenous people, and that in granting those land, we will do a cadastral survey to define their boundaries so that they can avoid any conflict later on with land and other stakeholders who may claim to own those lands. Definitely there are some mining issues that become very conflicted and worrisome, but again, the law allows for us a good resolution if the parties follow the law, both laws, the mining law and its regulation and the Amerindian Act, because most laws are harmonized with each other. And therefore, some of the conflicts that arise is when people are hard and fast and fail to adhere to the law, and then there is, a conflict. But nothing is too hard to find a solution. Some villages goes to the court, while some decide to do a mediation, and the stakeholders are brought in and negotiate out the issue. So it's simple. It's about giving land to Amerindian, granting that absolute title forever and ever, and to survey it.
Lastly, Minister, what is the progress of the distribution of the one-off cash grant, 25,000 one-off cash grant to households for persons living within the riverine and the hinterland communities?
I can tell you that the most recent one that has advanced is Region 7, starting in Cameron. Region 1 has started. Region 9 also. And yes, the communities that will benefit will be the hinterland regions and riverine communities. And so work is apace. Work is a peace.
Thank you very much, Minister. And you've been listening to Progress Report. I'm your host, Lennox Gasper. Until next time, thank you for watching.